Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us for another episode, 18th Century FAQ. Today we're going to be answering the question, what fabrics are appropriate? And this is very hard to get into in like a 5-minute video, but I am going to, in the comments below or in the description, I'm going to link to some of the other videos where my business partner Kitty Tomsick does an in-depth look into what kind of fabrics are appropriate. And today I'm just going to address some of the fabrics that we use, some of the fabrics that we don't use, different things to look out for when either purchasing fabric for yourself or purchasing clothing, and different bits that kind of are a good tell for whether or not a fabric is appropriate. My first thing that I'm going to say, this is a hard question to answer, but the first and best recommendation that I can give to you is look at 18th century paintings, look at fashion plates, look at extant examples. You'd be surprised at some of the colors that are existing on extant 18th century pieces, and what you're looking at is colors that have faded over time, and sometimes they're still very vibrant and lovely. But if you look at a lot of those garments, they'll be like under a sleeve flap, pocket flap, or interior of a sleeve, or along seam lines. You can see some of the original color that was there without degrading from sun or wear, and it is very vibrant and beautiful. So vibrancy is not necessarily something to stay away from. You'll see some of these, like this is a fabric that was put out by Colonial Williamsburg, and Hamilton came out with the 18th century clothing line. And so this has got some really exceptional colors in it, especially the pink. It's more than what I would expect for what I had expected before I got into this hobby for 18th century fabrics. But that being said, you have to watch out for like the electric colors. So if you think the really electric blue, that bright, vibrant blue, or bright, vibrant purples, some really, rich garnets and rubies, some of the more electric is the only word I can think for it at the moment, but some of those more in-your-face colors can only be achieved through specific types of dye that didn't come about until the 19th century. So look at those fabric lines. Like Colonial Williamsburg always puts out beautiful lines of fabric, and those are a really good base for what you're looking for color-wise. Some of these up here are also, I have different patterns, because that's another thing to look out for, is patterning. Florals are excellent. These are a beautiful example of lozenges or dots. They didn't have a true polka dot back in the 18th century. The big round polka dots, I've seen people use those, and I'm not gonna lie, I'm a fool for polka dots. I love them, but they didn't have polka dots like what we're thinking Minnie Mouse wears. They tend to have smaller dots, and they were called lozenges, and a lot of times they would be imperfect. They wouldn't necessarily have a set pattern or a set size. For modern clothing and recreations, they do often have that bit of perfection, but you really got to watch size when it comes to a polka dot or a lozenge. You see much smaller, particularly towards the end of the 18th century. I know Burley and Trowbridge have the most amazing polka dot dotted fabric, I believe is what they call it. It's a dotted muslin, and I am not going to lie, I've bought more than my fair share of it. It's lovely, but it is a nice smaller dot with a bit larger spacing. Then you're looking at things, you also will see things with florals that are very close to perfect. Like if you look at this piece, this is one of my examples of not so good 18th century. Someone gifted this to us, and we use it now for camp blankets because it is a nice weight. It's a cotton. It is more of an upholstery weight, so we use it to wrap things for protection, or if we just need an extra layer underneath our blankets at night. The floral portion of it, the flower, is not bad for middle of the 18th century. You're looking at a larger print, so something such as this, but the paisley, and I don't even know what to call this, is definitely more Victorian. You don't really see paisley even at the beginning of the 19th century. You're looking at that more towards Civil War and later. So you have to really watch those designs. If you see fabrics that have a very complicated micro design inside the flower or in the background, even if it is a very authentic design, that is actually a later piece. They had the ability to do amazing things, more than most people think to give them credit for. However, doing designs within designs within designs was not something that was as common because it was nigh impossible for them to do. I have not seen all pieces, so I can't say that that is across the board, but that is kind of a rule of thumb that we work by because we have yet to see an extant example with that level of detail, and particularly some of the bright colors that you see it happen in. Another thing to look out for is weight of fabric. There are a lot of people and a lot of companies that do amazing recreations of historic fabric, but they tend to stick it on a drapery fabric because that's most of the time where they're going to sell it for modern use. And as modern people with technologies that are far advanced to what was around 200 years ago, we tend to say, oh, their fabrics would not have been as fine as we can get them now. Well, it's actually on the contrary. We, as a people, don't tend to care as much, and it's very expensive for very fine fabrics. So what's mostly out there for us is not nearly as fine as what it was for them. Fabric, they had technologies that we just don't even use anymore. And especially their muslin. If you think muslin now, it is not nearly what it was in the 18th century. And you could get some amazing fine muslin to make garments out of that now is just almost impossible to find. And if you do find it, you have to pay a very pretty penny for it. So weight of fabric is huge. There are lots and lots of companies that sell historic recreations that are drapery fabric, and you can make that up into a garment as much as you want, but it's not going to feel the same, nor is it going to move and look the same as it would have in the 18th century. So that's just something to keep in mind. Drapery fabric is a drapery fabric. It is not the most historic weight-wise for using for 18th century clothing reenactment, but at the end of the day, it is what you're comfortable with and what you want and are able to afford, what you want and are able to work with. But that is just sharing some knowledge of what we have seen. I'm also going to say, and I don't have an example out here, but one of the big things that is worth noting, and we come across this too, is silk is a wonderful example of something that is just very hard to find for 18th century clothing. Their silk was very, very fine. It would not have had the schlubs or the thick bits of silk that run through it like you see in a modern dupioni, which is mostly what is out there for us, at least at an affordable price. So that's just another something to think of. There are wonderful people who sell fabric to 18th century reenactors who research their fabric and find fibers that are appropriate. So those are a good place to start, particularly when you're looking for silks. It's very easy to buy something that looks great online and you get it and it's a horribly schlubbed dupioni, and that's just not going to give you the look that you want. If you look at the paintings, their fine silks are just exquisite and pretty flawless. So with that, I'm going to have links below to some of Kitty's more in-depth look at research books where you can go to get information, and some examples that we have of amazing fabric examples for 18th century clothing, whether it be things we've purchased from people who have recreated historical prints, or books that have a wonderful catalog of this is what they had and were able to get to make their clothing. So thank you for joining us, and we'll talk to you next time.